Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're going to be looking at some fascinating articles today from the Clearfield Chronicle.
Yeah, it's a small town newspaper from Iowa.
Right. And these articles span several decades.
And they're all written by the same guy, too.
Yeah, George Bailey Sr.
He was the editor there for quite a while.
36 years.
That's a long time.
It is. He was a well-known figure in Clearfield, and he had this column called The Old Pressmen.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one.
And it was filled with these really personal stories about life in Clearfield.
And he had a real knack for storytelling.
He did. Like in one of his first articles, he talks about his family moving to Clearfield from South Dakota in a covered wagon.
Wow. That's a pretty incredible journey.
I know, right? And he doesn't gloss over the hardships either.
Yeah, like that story about his father nearly falling from a grain elevator during the trip.
That must have been terrifying.
Absolutely. It really puts things into perspective.
Doesn't it? And then they had to deal with a sick horse on top of everything else.
Oh, yeah, that was a tough situation.
Imagine being miles from your destination with a sick animal and no way to call for help.
You really had to rely on your own resourcefulness back then.
You did. And Bailey talks about how his grandparents settled along the Platte River.
That pioneering spirit is really inspiring.
It is. And even back then, they had to rely on each other for support.
Like that story about his grandfather using chewing tobacco as a remedy for puncture wounds.
I know, right? It sounds crazy to us now, but back then, that was probably their best option.
And it's fascinating to think about how they relied on traditional knowledge to get by.
It really makes you appreciate how far we've come in terms of medicine.
But it also highlights the importance of community and helping each other out.
Absolutely. And speaking of community, Bailey was deeply involved in Clearfield through his work as the editor of the Chronicle.
For 36 years, like you said.
Imagine all the stories he must have heard and all the changes he must witness during that time.
I bet there were some interesting characters in Clearfield.
Oh, definitely. He talks about his wife, Lucille, taking over the newspaper for a while.
Really?
Yeah, and he even mentions schoolgirls, helping them fold papers after printing.
Wow, it sounds like a real community effort.
It was. He also shares his thoughts on the rise of television.
I wonder what he thought about that.
Well, he actually preferred radio.
Interesting. Why is that?
He felt that TV was too focused on selling things you don't need.
And he thought radio was more informative.
Yeah, he liked the simplicity of it.
It's funny how he was already concerned about consumerism back then.
It shows that some things never really change.
That's true, but it's also interesting to think about how media has evolved since then.
It has. And now we have the internet and social media.
It's a whole different world.
But Bailey's articles give us a glimpse into a simpler time.
A time when community and connection were so important.
And those values still resonate with us today, don't they?
They do, and it's something we can all learn from.
Absolutely. And it wasn't all just about the newspaper for Bailey. He was also a farmer.
Oh, right. He talks about that a lot in his articles.
He does. And he doesn't shy away from the hard work and challenges that come with it.
Like those chinch bugs he was always battling.
Oh, yeah, those were a real menace.
And droughts, too.
It's amazing how farmers like Bailey persevered through all those obstacles.
They had a lot of grit and determination.
They did. And there's that funny story about his Model T Ford.
Oh, yeah, the one where he couldn't get it up a hill.
And his dad got so frustrated he broke his toe.
I love that story.
It shows that even in tough times, there was always room for a little humor.
It's important to be able to laugh at yourself sometimes.
It is. But Bailey's stories aren't all lighthearted either.
Yeah, he also talks about some more serious events.
Like that devastating flood that swept away a wagon and horses.
Oh, yeah, that was a terrible tragedy.
It was a reminder that life back then could be very unpredictable.
And dangerous, too.
Absolutely. But through it all, Bailey captures the spirit of Clearfield and its people.
He really does. He has a way of making you feel like you're right there with him.
And, I think that's what makes his writing so special. He doesn't just tell stories, he makes you feel them.
And that's what good storytelling is all about.
It is. It's about connecting with people on a deeper level.
And sharing those experiences that make us human.
Exactly. And Bailey was a master of that.
He was.
So let's dive into some of those stories and see what we can learn from this remarkable man and the community he loved so much.
Sounds good to me. I'm ready to hear more about Clearfield and its people.
Me too.
He really makes you feel like you're right there in Clearfield with him, doesn't he?
He does. And you know what else I find interesting? He doesn't just focus on the big events. He also pays attention to those little everyday details that reveal so much about life in Clearfield.
Like what?
Well, like that story about the old rooster that kept roosting on the windshield of his family's Rio car.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. His poor dad.
Right. He kept trying to shoo the rooster away, but it wouldn't budge.
And one day he got so frustrated he threw a stick at it.
And ended up breaking the windshield.
Oh,
It's a funny story, but it also shows how those little things can sometimes drive you crazy.
they can. Especially when you're trying to get somewhere and rooster's in your way.
Exactly. But Bailey also had a lot of respect for the natural world.
Yeah, oh, yeah. He talks a lot about the beauty of the Iowa landscape.
He does. And he describes the changing seasons so vividly, you can almost feel the warmth of the summer sun or the crispness of the autumn air.
It makes you want to go visit Clearfield and experience it for yourself.
It does. And speaking of experiencing things, Bailey's stories about farming are so relatable.
They are. Even if you've never set foot on a farm, you can still appreciate the hard work and dedication that goes into it.
And the challenges, too.
Oh, definitely. Like those pesky chinch bugs he was always fighting.
Oh, yeah, those were a constant battle for farmers back then.
And the droughts could be devastating.
They could wipe out entire crops.
It's amazing how farmers like Bailey coped with all those uncertainties.
It's a testament to their resilience and their connection to the land.
It is. And it makes you realize how much we depend on farmers for our food supply.
It does. But you know, Bailey wasn't just a farmer and an editor. He was also a bit of a showman.
A showman?
Well, he was involved in some pretty interesting events.
Like what?
Remember that wild horse-breaking exhibition at the Clearfield Street Fair?
Oh, yeah. That one sounded pretty intense.
It did. He described one horse bucking and rearing, trying to throw its rider.
It must have been quite a spectacle.
It was. And it shows that Bailey wasn't afraid to try new things and bring excitement to Clearfield.
He was a real community booster, wasn't he?
He was.
Yeah.
And he also knew how to have a good time.
Oh, definitely. Like that party he and Lucille threw for their son-in-law, Dari, before he went off to war.
Yeah, they invited all their friends and neighbors over and even played a little strip poker.
Strip poker?
Yeah, sounds like they had quite a night.
I bet they did. It's great that they could all come together to support Dari before he left.
It is.
Yeah.
And it shows how tight-knit the community was.
They really looked out for each other.
They did. And that sense of community is something that comes up again and again in Bailey's stories.
It's like the heart and soul of Clearfield.
It is. And it's something we can all learn from even today.
Absolutely.
But you know, Bailey's stories aren't always sunshine and roses.
What do you mean?
Well, he also talks about some of the darker moments in Clearfield's history.
Oh, yeah, like that terrible flood that swept away a wagon and horses.
Right. It was a reminder that life back then could be very unpredictable and dangerous.
It's easy to forget that when we're reading these stories from the past.
It is. But it's important to remember that life wasn't always easy.
Even in a small town like Clearfield.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Bailey doesn't shy away from those difficult topics.
He presents a balanced view of life.
He does. The good and the bad. The happy and the sad.
It makes his writing more authentic and relatable.
It does. Because that's what life is all about, right?
It is. It's a mix of everything.
And Bailey captures that mix beautifully in his Clearfield Chronicle articles.
He really does. He's a gifted storyteller.
He is. And I think we can all learn something from his ability to find meaning and humor in the everyday moments.
Absolutely. He reminds us to appreciate the simple things and to cherish the people around us.
And to never stop telling our stories.
Because those stories are what connect us to each other and to the past.
Exactly.
And, it's not just the content of his writing that's interesting.
It's the way it changes over time, too, right?
Right? As he gets older, his writing becomes more reflective.
Like he's looking back on his life and trying to make sense of it all.
Exactly. There's a sense of wisdom and perspective that wasn't there before.
And he starts to share more of his personal thoughts and feelings.
Like in that article where he talks about his wife's uncle and his family moving in with them.
Oh, yeah, that was during a tough time for everyone.
He was during the Depression.
Right, and Bailey's family didn't hesitate to help.
Even though they didn't have much themselves.
It shows their generosity and compassion.
It does. And it's a reminder that we should always be there for each other.
Especially during difficult times.
Exactly. And Bailey also talks about how Clearfield itself changed over the years.
He does. He mentions the businesses that came and went, the buildings that were built and torn down.
It's like he's watching the town grow and evolve right before his eyes.
He is. And he doesn't shy away from the fact that some of those changes were difficult.
Like the decline of the local economy.
Right. But he also finds hope in the resilience of the people.
The way they adapted and found new ways to thrive.
Exactly. And that's what I love about Bailey's writing. He always finds the good in people.
He does, even when he's talking about tough subjects.
It's like he has this unwavering faith in humanity.
And it's contagious, isn't it?
It is. It makes you want to be a better person yourself.
It does. And I think that's the true power of Bailey's writing It inspires us to live more meaningful
To
lives.
appreciate the simple things and to connect with our communities,
Exactly. And to never forget the importance of storytelling.
because those stories are what keep our history alive.
They do, and they help us understand who we are and where we come from.
And that's something we should all value and cherish.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've just about covered everything.
Yeah, I think we've had a pretty thorough look at George Bailey Sr.'s Clearfield Chronicle articles.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It has. He was a truly remarkable man.
He was a gifted writer, a dedicated community member, and a true storyteller.
And I think we can all learn a lot from his life and his work.
I agree.
So thanks for joining us on this exploration of Clearfield and its history.
It's been a pleasure sharing these stories with you.
And you hope you'll join us again next time for another deep dive into the past.
Until then, keep exploring and keep those stories alive.
Thanks, everyone.